All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Pokemon, and as promised in this video, I'm going to talk about why the 7 artists that left Metazoo at the end of 2023 decided to leave. So for those of you guys that don't know, the 7 that we're talking about are Chris Campman, Poncho, Michael Peckham, Isaac Sky Lee, Seb, Saban, and Brunez. So those are the 7 that left towards the end of 2023. So when we're talking about artists that left, we're talking about those specific artists that left within about a week of each other. Now, before we get into this video, I want to preface this by saying I spoke to 5 of the 7 artists that left. In this video, I'm not going to specifically name any of the 5 that I talked to, but I did talk to the majority of the artists that left. So I think that's important to also mention that 2 of them I did not talk to. So when we talk about some of these reasons for leaving, just as an aside, it might not necessarily apply to the other 2 that I didn't speak to. They might have had other reasons. But collectively, talking to the 5 that I did talk to, it sounded like the reasons were pretty much the same for everybody. And when we talked, we kind of agreed on the way to word this. So in this video, I'm going to be omitting any personal anecdotes or stories that they might have told that would give a clue to anybody watching this which artist might have told that story or which artist might have had that opinion. So in this video, we're going to be talking kind of generally about things that we agreed on as a whole that kind of concerned all the artists and why they left. So to get into it, the first thing we're going to talk about is artist pay. This was one of the reasons I would say a lot of people left, and I think they would agree with that. Now, when we talk about artist pay, it's important to point out we're not talking about a salary. So Metazoo artists were paid on commission. Now, some of the numbers that they gave me, I'm just going to give you guys a range so you have kind of an understanding about what kind of money we're talking about. On a good year, an average to good year, such as 2021, 2022, not 2023, but like an average good year, let's say $30,000 to $50,000 would be about what an artist would make annually. Now, this is broken down into 2 categories. There is the commission that they get for a traditional style of art, which means they made it with a physical medium like a paintbrush or pens or whatever. They actually physically made the art. And the price per piece on that is about $380 per piece. That's what they get paid. Now, currently, the price for digital art, so art made on a computer, is $150, so significantly lower than that $380. And then specifically for the Karami set, that went down to $130, according to what they told me here. And on a typical year with a good work volume, they would have anywhere from 100 to 200 projects, so 100 to 200 pieces that they would submit at either $380 or $150. And that kind of changed with Karami. So one of the main reasons why the money, the pay was a factor, is specifically this year in 2023, which also kind of speaks to the other reason, which is Andy, the new management. So as you guys know, in early 2023, Mike kind of stepped back, and then Andy became president of Metazoo, and Andy also became in charge of the artist. And some of the things that came with Andy came with this pay cut. So at one point, Mike was paying the artist $380 per piece, whether it was digital or physical. And then when Andy came in, that was when the digital went down to $150. And then during Andy, obviously, was Karami, and then it went down to $130 per piece. So there was a couple things with Andy and the pay. There was that aspect of it. So in 2023, they were getting less work because obviously there was less stuff to work on in this past year. So they were getting less consistent work. They were being paid less. And then in addition to that, with the Karami set in particular, Sanrio, I guess, was very strict and very discerning about which artwork they would accept for that set. So what I was told was what would happen is these artists would make a piece, submit it, Sanrio would reject it. So they did the work, they made the art, and Sanrio would reject it and not use it on a card. And then they wouldn't be paid by Metazoo because their work was rejected, but they still did the work that they were commissioned to do. So that was another issue. They were getting less work, they were getting paid less, and then work that they did that got rejected, they didn't get paid for at all. So that was another big issue with the Karami set. Now, another thing that they told me was that during the reign of Andy, one of the rules that he tried to implement was that they wouldn't do any work for other companies outside of Metazoo. Now, this is like multiple different factors cutting into their income, and the artist kind of stressed to me that so many of them were already struggling with money, in all these different things that happened under Andy's reign in 2023 were just like further financial pressure on them, making it worse and worse and kind of less desirable to work at Metazoo. So to answer the question that a lot of people had is, yes, money and the pay was a factor in the artists leaving all at the same time. I think it's worth mentioning as a side note that during this time where things are starting to slow down, the artists are mentioning this and bringing this up to Andy. The prior year, 2022, was much busier. There's a lot more stuff going on. There's a lot more projects for them to do, a lot more consistent work. So in 2023, when things started to slow down, become a little bit more inconsistent, and the communication got a little bit thinner, they had less work to do. As they were taking these pay cuts, and as they were dealing with this, you can only work for Metazoo and no outside companies, they're saying, look, we're struggling financially, and they were pushing for higher pay. Specifically, they were pushing to be on salary, maybe in addition to commission, so that when they had these like kind of dead periods in between, they could still have money coming in to pay their bills, and they'd have a little bit more consistency, especially considering the fact that this was the same time period, like early 2023 when Andy was taking over. This was when Mike was telling people, we made $50 million last year. This is when Andy was buying Lamborghini. So they're seeing this, and they're like raising these concerns and basically being met with complete indifference. So I think when we talk about this, it's important to point out this wasn't like a singular event. There wasn't like one thing that pushed the artist to leave. This was something that was just a constant buildup of things that I think most of them are pointing back specifically to Andy taking over. But it was something that just gradually built up over time. And then when Chris left and then Pancho left, everyone else is kind of like, it's time to go. We've taken about all we can take. So I think that's an important side note here, that the artists were pushing for better pay and better treatment in that aspect. And just a second note on that, when we're talking about these ranges of yearly income from commission and the amount of projects, obviously there were some artists that did a lot more work than others. There were some that did a lot more cards for a set or whatever, and some artists that did a lot less. That's why we're giving kind of a broad range here, because obviously there were some that did a lot more, some that did a lot less, some that fell in between. So that range is kind of trying to capture all of that. So that's why it's so broad. Now, specifically, when we talk about Andy, so Andy, again, the new president, when we talk about some of these things, I want to say, when I talk about what the artist said about Andy, I'm going to say they felt this way about it. And I want to say that to express that they're expressing opinions, not making any direct accusations towards Andy, not accusing him of anything specific, but this is how they felt about their experience with him. And I want to say that to kind of protect them as well. This is just their opinion on their time working with Andy. The things they said were they felt threatened by Andy, manipulated by Andy, gaslit by Andy, and they felt that Andy gave specific preferential treatment to some artists over others. They felt that some artists were getting opportunities only because of their relationship to Andy. And to speak further to that, Andy is dating somebody that is currently a Metazoo artist. And I'm not going to name that person because I really don't like when YouTubers talk about people's relationships. I'm not going to talk too much about that. But that was one of the things that a lot of the artists had to say, was they felt like some people were getting special treatment from Andy while other people were really getting screwed. So I think that's an important thing to point out. And I also want to point out here that I know that Mike really gets a lot of flack. Mike Waddell gets a lot of flack online. And typically when something goes wrong, Mike is the guy that takes all the blame because he's the guy that's associated with Metazoo. He's still kind of the face of it. He's the guy that created it. But really, none of these artists really had a specific negative thing to say about Mike. In fact, some of the artists actually had really nice things to say about Mike. So I wanted to include that because I feel like Mike does often get the blame for things that maybe he had little to nothing to do with. And these artists leaving, I think, is one of those cases where almost no one really said anything negative about him. But pretty much everybody had something negative to say about Andy, and nobody had anything positive to say about their experience with Andy. But like I said, some of the artists did say positive things about their time working with Mike. So I think that was something worth pointing out, that when we're talking about Metazoo maybe needing a change in management, we're not necessarily talking about Mike. It seems like the issue with the artists was more a management thing with Andy. Now, to speak a little bit further to the Andy piece of the equation, when it came to the preferential treatment part of it, they thought that some artists were getting treated better than others based on their relationship with Andy. One specific example that I was given was under Andy's control, going to a convention where they could make a lot of extra money. So keep in mind, at this point, there's already a lot of artists that are hurting for money. They're not making as much. They're not getting as consistent work. They're getting paid less. They're doing work that sometimes is getting rejected and they're not getting paid at all. So they're already in a little bit of a stressful financial situation. And another thing that they said that Andy did was he made conventions invitation only for the artists. And some artists didn't get to go if they didn't get invited. So they couldn't go sign cards or make that extra money at the booth at the convention. And that was a big deal to a lot of people when they noticed that most of the time, the artist that Andy was in a relationship with was invited to all those conventions while some weren't. And I think a lot of the artists felt some type of way about that as well, which is pretty understandable. So I think that when it comes down to it, there's been all kinds of speculation about why the artist may have left, what might have been going on behind the scenes. And I want to say the artists really wanted to clear that up for you guys. They really seem to appreciate the community. They see that everybody's wondering about it. And like I said, I don't think any single one of them spoke out individually because they may have been afraid of repercussions or afraid of pissing off somebody at Metazoo. And like I said, they didn't want to be persona non grata and be the artist that spoke up and was kind of the whistleblower and had the target specifically on their back. So I thought this was the best way to do it. A lot of them reached out to me to do this. And I think this is the best way to represent their experience at Metazoo and why they left, because a lot of them would represent them leaving. It was not on good terms. They were not happy with their employment at Metazoo. They were not happy with how they were treated. Some of them not happy with how they were paid. Some of them not happy with Andy. And I think when Metazoo initially released a statement about the artist leaving, one of the things that Metazoo kind of phrased in there was, oh, we're going in a different artistic direction and we wish these people well, leaving the fans with almost the implication that it was either a mutual decision for the artist to leave or that Metazoo decided that they should leave. So I want to be clear here. These artists were not fired and they were not let go. They chose to leave and turned in their letters of resignment. So this was 100% their choice because they were unhappy with the current situation at Metazoo. So it wasn't a mutual thing. I've seen people speculate, like with Poncho, for example, he has a darker style of artwork. I've seen people speculate maybe they let Poncho go because they were going in a different direction with their artwork. That's not the case. That's not how this went down. So I think that was something that they really wanted the community to know. It wasn't a case of Metazoo deciding to go in a different artwork direction. And I think Metazoo was probably panicking after they left. It was just that, you know, all these people were so unhappy with how they were treated and they had been thinking about leaving for really quite some time. But I think it took that first artist leaving, Chris Campman, to encourage the rest of them to be like, okay, we're out of here. It's time to go. We've put up with this too long. And I think it was just a combination of those things. And I would say that collectively, when I talked to all these artists, those were the two real things that everything kind of came back to, was this issue with the pay and so many different issues with Andy. And like I said, I don't want to get into any specific stories with Andy because, like I said, we're not going to accuse him of anything. We're not going to defame him in any way in this video. We're just going to talk about how the artists felt they were treated by him and their opinions on their experience with him. And you guys can draw your own conclusions about whether or not they're telling the truth about that interaction with Andy in the comments below. And for the record, I believe they are telling the truth. I believe that their experience and the reasons they felt that way were valid. But like I said, we're just not going to tell any specific stories. I don't want to single any particular artist out so that Metazoo would know which artist said what. And this is just kind of a generalization of why the Metazoo artist left. So, oh, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned this as well. Another big part of it was lack of communication. They felt like they just weren't getting the responses that they needed from Andy or Mike. But they said that lack of communication, especially when Andy took over, was a huge issue. Not getting a response back, not getting a call back, not getting a reply, just not getting answers to their questions and kind of feeling ghosted and left in the dark about a lot of what was going on with Metazoo, which is funny because that's kind of what the Metazoo community as a whole is kind of feeling right now. The players are kind of in the dark. The collectors are kind of in the dark. The buyers are in the dark. Like, the players don't know when they're getting paid. The collectors don't know when they're going to get the pre-orders that they ordered. The retailers, the LGSs are in the dark. The artists that work there are in the dark. They're not getting responses. The Rudies and the Argoses that try to reach out to Mike about certain things, they don't get a response. They're left in the dark. it seems like a very consistent pattern with Metazoo. So the future of Metazoo really at this point seems pretty uncertain, based on the fact that even their own employees, their own artists are feeling that way as well. So I think that basically covers it, basically covers it all. If you guys have any more questions or comments, let me know in the comments below about what you think about all this, but that's essentially it. And I think a lot of it really did come back to mostly the way that they perceived Andy treated them. Like I said, they felt threatened, manipulated, gaslit, preferential treatment. That was a big part of it. So to the artist, I really appreciate your time. A lot of these guys spent a really significant amount of time, telling me their stories and talking to me and really filling me in on a lot of these details. And like I said, I'm not going to go too specific into some of the stuff they told me, but I do appreciate them sharing all their individual stories and then collectively coming up with what we would give as the ultimate reason why they left. But again, to be clear, some of them left on what they felt were bad terms, and they left unhappy with the situation. So that's basically it. But I want to thank the artists for their time. I want to thank the artists for everything they contributed to the Metazoo community. And they've still left a legacy that is going to live on forever. I mean, I've got Chris Campman's Nightfall, Revive Mothman right behind me in every video. So these guys had legendary cards. Poncho had some legendary cards in Nightfall. All these guys had really good work that's going to live on forever. But I hope that may have answered some of your guys' questions as to why the artist actually left, and maybe puts an end to some of the speculation and the rumors out there. But that is, to the best of my knowledge, how they left, based on talking to 5 of them and them sharing their experience with me. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe. Nick Strength and Pokemon, signing out.